You think your thoughts are just electrical impulses in your brain, private mental events that have no effect on the world around you. But what if you're wrong? What if your thoughts aren't just observing reality, but actively creating it? What if the very act of thinking shapes the physical world in ways that science is only beginning to understand? Because there's mounting evidence from quantum mechanics, consciousness research, and information theory that suggests thoughts might be far more powerful than you've ever imagined. Not in some mystical New Age sense, but in the most fundamental physical sense possible. And if this is true, then everything you think you know about the relationship between mind and matter is completely backwards. You've been told that thoughts are produced by brains, that consciousness emerges from neural activity, and that mental events are separate from physical events. The brain creates thoughts, not the other way around. But what if consciousness isn't a product of matter? What if matter is a product of consciousness? What if the entire physical universe is something more like a thought than a thing? This isn't mysticism. This is where cutting-edge physics leads when you follow it to its logical conclusion. The first hint that thoughts might create reality comes from quantum mechanics, specifically from what's called the measurement problem. When quantum systems are not being observed, they exist in superposition, experiencing all possible states simultaneously. But when an observation is made, this superposition collapses into a single definite state. The act of observation literally determines what becomes real. But here's the crucial question. What counts as an observation? Early interpretations suggested that any interaction with a measuring device would cause collapse. But deeper investigation reveals that consciousness might be the key factor. In the famous double-slit experiment, particles behave like waves when not observed, creating interference patterns that show they're somehow going through both slits simultaneously. But when you try to observe which slit the particle goes through, the wave function collapses and the particle behaves like a particle going through one slit or the other. What's shocking is that this collapse happens even when the detection equipment doesn't directly interact with the particle's path. Simply having the information available for a conscious observer to know which path was taken is enough to collapse the superposition. This suggests that consciousness doesn't just observe reality. It participates in creating reality at the most fundamental level. But quantum mechanics goes even further. According to some interpretations, consciousness might be what transforms probability waves into actual events. Without conscious observation, quantum systems remain in indefinite superposition forever. This would mean that consciousness is not separate from the physical world, but is the mechanism by which the physical world comes into existence. Thoughts don't just observe reality. They literally collapse possibilities into actualities. If this is correct, then every act of conscious observation is an act of creation. Every thought that focuses on a particular possibility is helping to make that possibility real. But the connection between thoughts and reality might be even more direct than quantum mechanics suggests. Recent research in information theory and digital physics proposes that the universe might be fundamentally computational rather than physical. From this perspective, what we call matter and energy are actually information patterns being processed by some kind of cosmic computation. Space, time, particles, and forces are all emergent properties of underlying information processing. And if reality is fundamentally informational, then thoughts, which are also information patterns, might be able to interact directly with the informational substrate of the universe. Your brain wouldn't be creating thoughts, it would be accessing and modifying the information patterns that constitute reality itself. Thinking wouldn't be separate from physical processes, it would be the most fundamental physical process. This connects to discoveries in neuroscience that challenge traditional views of how consciousness works. Instead of consciousness being produced by the brain, there's growing evidence that the brain might function more like a receiver or interface for consciousness. Studies of patients with severe brain damage who retain normal consciousness, cases of acquired savant syndrome where brain injuries lead to extraordinary mental abilities, and research into psychedelic states all suggest that consciousness might not be as dependent on brain structure as previously thought. If consciousness can operate independently of specific neural configurations, then it might not be constrained by the physical limitations of brain tissue. It might be able to access and influence information patterns throughout the universe. This would explain phenomena that have puzzled researchers for decades. Remote viewing, where individuals seem to access information from distant locations. Precognition, where people appear to know about future events. And psychokinesis, where mental intention seems to influence physical systems. These phenomena have been documented under controlled laboratory conditions by researchers at Princeton, Stanford, and other respected institutions. The effects are usually small, but they're statistically significant and reproducible. If thoughts can create reality, then these phenomena aren't paranormal anomalies. They're natural consequences of consciousness operating according to its true nature. But the evidence for thought-reality interaction goes beyond laboratory experiments. Every human technology, every work of art, every social institution exists because someone first imagined it into being. The device you're using to read this started as patterns of thought in someone's mind. The building you're in, the clothes you're wearing, the language you're thinking in, all began as mental constructs before becoming physical realities. In a very real sense, human civilization is the result of thoughts creating reality. The entire built environment around you is materialized imagination. But this process might work at much more fundamental levels than just human technology and culture. If consciousness is truly primary, then all of physical reality might be the result of some kind of cosmic imagination. This connects to ancient philosophical traditions that have always maintained that consciousness is the ground of being. Hindu Vedanta, Buddhist Yogacara, and Western idealism all propose that what we call the physical world is actually mental in nature. Modern physics is arriving at remarkably similar conclusions through completely different methods. The universe described by quantum field theory, where particles pop in and out of existence and where information plays a fundamental role, looks much more like a mind than like a machine. Some physicists have proposed that the universe might literally be a mind, or at least something mind-like. The cosmic consciousness hypothesis suggests that the universe is a vast information processing system that gives rise to physical phenomena through processes analogous to thinking. From this perspective, individual human consciousness isn't separate from cosmic consciousness, but is a localized expression of it. Your thoughts aren't just your private mental events, they're modifications in the cosmic information field that constitutes reality. This would mean that when you think, you're not just changing neural patterns in your brain. You're changing information patterns in the fabric of space-time itself. Your thoughts are literally reshaping reality at the quantum level. But if thoughts create reality, why doesn't everyone experience obvious reality-shaping effects? Why can't you just think your way to wealth, health, and happiness? The answer might lie in the collective and unconscious nature of reality creation. If all consciousness participates in creating reality, then individual thoughts would be constrained by the collective thoughts of all conscious beings. Your individual intentions would have to work within and against the combined intentions of billions of other minds, most of which are unconscious of their reality-creating power and therefore tend to recreate familiar patterns. Additionally, if consciousness creates reality through quantum processes, then the effects would be probabilistic rather than deterministic. Thoughts would influence the probability of certain outcomes without guaranteeing them. This would explain why mental intention seems to have subtle but measurable effects in laboratory settings, while dramatic reality alterations remain rare and difficult to control. But there's also the question of belief and expectation. If consciousness creates reality through information patterns, then your beliefs about what's possible would constrain what actually becomes possible. If you believe that thoughts can't influence physical reality, then your thoughts would tend to create a reality where this belief appears to be confirmed. Your skepticism would become self-fulfilling. Conversely, if you believe that consciousness is powerful and creative, you might experience a reality where mental intention has more obvious effects. Your beliefs about the nature of consciousness would influence what consciousness is capable of in your experience. This creates a strange feedback loop where the reality you experience depends partly on what you think reality is like. Your model of how consciousness works becomes part of how consciousness actually works for you. This explains why different people can have radically different experiences of the relationship between mind and world. It's not that one person is right and another is wrong. They're literally living in different realities created by different beliefs about the nature of reality. But this raises profound questions about the nature of truth and objectivity. If consciousness creates reality, and if different consciousnesses can create different realities, then what does it mean for something to be objectively true? One answer is that objective reality might be the intersection of all subjective realities, the common elements that emerge when multiple consciousnesses interact and negotiate their different reality-creating tendencies. Science would represent the collective attempt to discover which aspects of reality are stable across different observers and which aspects are dependent on the particular consciousness doing the observing. From this perspective, scientific objectivity isn't about eliminating consciousness from the picture. It's about understanding how consciousness contributes to the creation of shared reality. This has practical implications for how we approach scientific research, personal development, healing, and social change. If consciousness participates in creating reality, then the quality and direction of consciousness matters in ways we've barely begun to explore. Meditation, visualization, intention setting, and other consciousness training practices wouldn't just be personal development tools, they'd be reality engineering technologies. By changing how you think and what you focus on, you'd literally be changing the world. Mental health wouldn't just be about personal well-being, it would be about participating constructively in collective reality creation. Depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions might partly result from and contribute to distortions in the reality creation process. Education wouldn't just be about transmitting information. It would be about training consciousness to participate more skillfully in the ongoing creation of reality. Teaching people to think clearly and creatively would literally be teaching them to create a better world. Social movements and political activism would need to recognize that changing collective beliefs and mental patterns might be as important as changing external institutions. Hearts and Minds campaigns wouldn't just be metaphors. They'd be literal attempts to modify the consciousness that creates social reality. But perhaps most importantly, recognizing that thoughts create reality would transform how we understand personal responsibility and human potential. Every thought you think, every belief you hold, every mental pattern you reinforce would be an act of participation in cosmic creativity. You wouldn't just be a passive observer of a predetermined universe. You'd be an active collaborator in the ongoing creation of existence itself. Your consciousness wouldn't be an accident of biology. It would be a fundamental force of nature with genuine creative power. This doesn't mean that you can simply think your way to any outcome you desire. Reality creation through consciousness would be constrained by physical laws, collective patterns, and the inherent limitations of working within space and time. But it does mean that consciousness is far more powerful and significant than materialist science has assumed. Mind wouldn't be an epiphenomenon of matter. Matter would be a manifestation of mind. The implications stretch from quantum physics to neuroscience to psychology to sociology to cosmology. If thoughts create reality, then consciousness research becomes the most important field of scientific investigation. Understanding how consciousness works, how it interacts with information patterns, and how individual minds contribute to collective reality creation would be the key to understanding everything else. We might be on the verge of a scientific revolution as significant as the Copernican revolution or the discovery of evolution. Instead of seeing consciousness as a mere product of complex matter, we might recognize matter as a product of complex consciousness. This wouldn't diminish the value of physical science. It would situate physical science within a larger context of consciousness studies. Chemistry, biology, and physics would become specialized investigations into how consciousness creates different types of experiential patterns. But it would also open up entirely new fields of research and technology development. Consciousness-based healing, reality programming through mental intention, and collaborative reality design could become practical disciplines rather than fantasy or pseudoscience. The future might hold technologies that work directly with consciousness rather than just with matter and energy. Devices that amplify intention, environments that respond to mental states, and systems that facilitate group consciousness could become commonplace. Most importantly, understanding that thoughts create reality could help humanity mature into conscious participation in its own evolutionary development. Instead of leaving the future to chance or to unconscious forces, we could begin to deliberately create the kind of reality we want to inhabit. This would require developing unprecedented levels of mental clarity, emotional maturity, and collective coordination. But if consciousness truly has creative power, then developing consciousness becomes the most important work we can do. You are not just a biological accident observing a meaningless universe. You are consciousness itself, temporarily focused through human experience, participating in the ongoing creation of reality through every thought you think. And that changes everything about what it means to be alive, to be conscious, and to be human in a universe that might be far more responsive to your thoughts than you ever dared to imagine. The mind that you think is confined to your skull might actually be the creative force that shapes the cosmos. And recognizing this truth might be the first step toward learning to use this creative power wisely. Your thoughts create reality. The only question is what kind of reality you choose to think into existence. But this realization comes with enormous responsibility. If your thoughts truly participate in creating reality, then every mental pattern you reinforce, every belief you maintain, and every focus you sustain becomes a contribution to the collective reality that everyone experiences. Negative thought patterns wouldn't just harm your personal well-being. They would contribute to negative patterns in the broader reality field. Destructive beliefs about human nature, scarcity, conflict, and limitation would tend to manifest more experiences that confirm these beliefs. Conversely, constructive mental patterns would contribute to positive developments in collective reality. Thoughts of abundance, cooperation, possibility, and growth would increase the probability of experiences that reflect these patterns. This means that mental hygiene becomes a form of social responsibility. Taking care of your consciousness wouldn't just be self-improvement. It would be a contribution to the betterment of the world. But it also means that consciousness development becomes urgently important for human survival and flourishing. If we're collectively creating reality through our combined mental patterns, then the quality of human consciousness directly determines the quality of human experience. Current global challenges like climate change, political polarization, economic inequality, and environmental degradation might all reflect dysfunctional patterns in human consciousness that need to be addressed at the level of thought and belief, not just through external policy changes. Healing the world would require healing human consciousness. This doesn't mean ignoring practical action, but recognizing that practical action is most effective when it emerges from clear, compassionate, and wise mental states. This perspective also transforms how we understand education and child development. If consciousness creates reality, then teaching children how to think, what to believe, and how to direct their attention becomes the most important function of human society. Educational systems would need to focus as much on consciousness training as on information transmission. Teaching children to meditate, to think critically, to manage their emotions, and to envision positive possibilities would be recognized as essential life skills. Mental health support would become preventive rather than just therapeutic. Instead of waiting for psychological problems to develop, society would invest in creating conditions that support healthy consciousness development from birth. The entertainment industry, media, and cultural institutions would also need to recognize their role in shaping collective consciousness. Stories, images, and messages that promote fear, division, and limitation would be understood as contributing to negative reality creation. Art, literature, film, and other cultural expressions that inspire hope, connection, and possibility would be valued not just as entertainment, but as reality-shaping tools that help create a better world. This doesn't mean censorship or control, but rather conscious choice about what kinds of mental patterns we want to amplify and reinforce through our collective attention and creative expression. Religious and spiritual traditions would gain new relevance as repositories of consciousness training techniques and wisdom about the relationship between mind and reality. Prayer, meditation, contemplation, and other spiritual practices would be recognized as technologies for reality creation rather than just personal comfort or community bonding. Science and spirituality would no longer be seen as conflicting worldviews, but as complementary approaches to understanding consciousness and its creative power. Your thoughts create reality. The question is what reality you choose to create.